Magnus, but so hard to predict because Aronian is such a fantastic player of great versatility. What about the other match as well? This is an interesting one between Firouzja and Grishuk. Just a word on that before we go into the game, Tanya, because Firouzja's already qualified to Norway, right? So he's got nothing to lose. It's Grishuk that has the pressure on him here.
You're absolutely. It's the same storyline for Levon as it is for Grishuk. Alireza, he won a tournament to punch his ticket. And for Alexander Grishuk, it is this final event. He wants to get through, but it's one match at a time. He knows that Alireza has been a player who's so in form right now. He's played exceptionally well. So it's going to be a tough fight, but Grishuk coming in form in this one as well. Let's jump to the action as we've got moves coming in. And speaking about trying to create chaos, well, for now, everything's under control. The pawn has been picked up as well. Levon looking to try to develop on the queen side. The B pawn would have hit the queen, so the queen falls back. Gaining space on in the center of the board right now. Everything under control for both players. A solid start.
Yeah, a lot of queen moves out of the opening for Magnus here, but all fairly well prepared and fairly standard for both sides. White's going to be castling a king side. A little bit of a difference in pawn structures here. Black is missing a D pawn, whereas white is missing a C pawn, but extremely early days to have us tell you what that's likely to mean come an endgame or something like that. Still lots of pieces on their starting squares. We need a little bit more information before this board will truly come to life.
I couldn't agree more with you. And I think right now, these are the kind of openings where it's really not as much about concrete moves as it is about the setup that you want to take with your pieces. At some point, I am expecting Levon to advance on the queen side with the B pawn, but you always have to watch out for knight jumps in those cases. So it might be a good moment to actually just develop the other pieces. Often the queen lands on C7, the bishop on the king side lands on E7, get your king to safety, and then find a way to start pushing on the queen side. Meanwhile, for Magnus Carlsen, it will be about trying to strike in the center of the board at the right time with the D pawn. As you rightly pointed out, that white's got the D pawn, black doesn't. D4 always on the card, but needs to come at the right moment.
Yes, because otherwise you get, I guess we might end up having this conversation later on, Tanya, in this game. But I guess if white plays D4, you always have to think, is it possible for black to play C4 in response and have black's attack on the queen side faster than white's attack in the center? And sometimes yes, sometimes no, but that's always got to be a question you're asking yourself in this sort of position, right? Well, no, it's not. We're just doing it. Okay.
We're going to find out. And Levon answers for us. So the ideas that we were discussing, both of them on the board. Magnus strikes in the center. Levon decides it's time to get the bishop into the game. But right now, the queen is under attack. So first, he needs to take a moment to find a good square for the queen. The most natural one to me that comes to mind is simply slide over up one square ahead. Keep the queen connected to the pawn on C5. The next move, you want your bishop here. Yes, the knight could jump into the game, but you always have bishop sliding over to B7 to block out that diagonal.
And with the pawns advancing on the queen side as well, we're not realistically looking at castling queen side. We are likely going to be castling short very, very soon for white. You don't really want to be moving into a pawn storm like this. Black still has one minor piece left, that bishop, which is almost certainly going to E7 before we complete development there and get castled. But things looking pretty chilled out. The one thing I would point out is that bishop on G2 has a pretty tasty long diagonal right now where a rook is just kind of lying in wait. So at all times, Levon has to be looking out for moves like knight to E5 with discovered attacks, for example. Not necessarily accomplishing a material advantage here, but you're just constantly worried about it in the back of your mind until you get clear.
I believe Levon's looked at this already and decided he doesn't care as much because he does have the developing move bishop b7, trying to get rid of the sniper that you pointed out. It really is a key piece in white's position, you very rightly said. For Magnus, a beautiful bishop on g2 on the long diagonal. And for Levon, in these kind of positions as black, you really want to trade this bishop off. So bishop to b7 would be the response if the knight was to jump forward.
Now, if is there a universe, Tanya? I'm just stirring the pot here. Is there a universe where the bishop comes out to b7, the dark square bishop comes out to e7, and then Levon unleashes with h5? Does that world exist?
I think every universe and every world is possible when it comes to Levon. He's truly known as the artist. He's such a creative player. So will not be surprised if he finds a way to create some activity on the king side. But for now, John, I do believe, especially with the last few moves that Lev has played, that he's eyeing activity more on where he's expanded, which is the queen side right now. And Magnus immediately starts targeting that. He pushes the A pawn. He's trying to provoke black to push this B pawn one step ahead, which would create a nice little square for that white knight eventually to go over to. And I also want to mention that after a move like B4, white would also have an intermezzo, an in-between move of A5 before perhaps getting even more aggressive with the white knight.
Oh, wow. Yeah, potentially going in there. That would be very interesting indeed. Bishop B7 has been found, by the way. So the move to try and not only maintain the tension, but just diffuse some of the tactics white has in this position to maintain what might be a very, very slender lead in terms of space. Although there's an argument to say white's actually done quite a good job of getting to this position. Black feels like we should have an opportunity to progress, for example, on the A7 to G1 diagonal. If that pawn gets taken on C5, the bishop comes straight out. So not something Magnus wants to be helping Levon do. Or, as soon as I say that, maybe it is. I'm pretty sure we're going to see bishop takes pawn there. Completing development and setting up to castle. I suppose knight takes is possible, but bishop feels way more natural.
I like what you're saying, and I completely agree with you. You know, you're developing in one move with a threat, and now white, the computer points it out as well. Magnus will castle, defending the F2 pawn. Levon can do the same, and to me, it just looks like Lev's managed to get a great position out of the opening. The pieces are developed. The bishop is eyeing that very strong piece you earlier highlighted for Magnus. The knight's also doing a good job. Meanwhile, it looks like black's rook will eventually come onto the C line. A nice file where black can start doubling up as well at some point. You place one rook on the D file, one rook on the C file. I think Levon should be very happy with this start in the match.
It feels very natural for black, doesn't it? Because you have open files on C and D. It's clear you simply need to castle, get your rooks onto those open files. Yes, the double bishops looking at the queen side is a little bit of a worry for black, but with a rook on C8 and D8, neither of those squares are squares that the bishops are looking at, so it's okay. B4, the idea you were saying earlier, Tanya, B4 has been played, and instantly the computer's not giving us time to think about it even. That intermezzo that you already covered is saying this is the move to play, otherwise black gets an advantage, and that has been found by Magnus Carlsen.
And the move is on the board, and I'm very surprised because when you play a move like B4, you have to be very sure about it. You leave some key squares behind. Also, now Magnus immediately retreats with the knight, attacking that queen before he decides where to jump with his own knight. His last move seems to imply that he probably wants to get the knight to the center of the board because now the bishop and the queen both would defend that square. And this knight from E1, notice how it slyly defends the queen. So after knight E4, there are no tactics, or knight A4, there are no tactics with bishop takes pawn. And maybe we'll just quickly show these lines because knight to E1 was very, very important before you move the knight. But the players are just moving in so quickly right now. And John, I'm just going to quickly back up at this point. Levon made the move queen to C6. And the whole point is that, yes, you've created a battery, but you're also eyeing white's queen on C2. So if Magnus would have rushed with moving that knight away, boom, this bishop jumps to F2, clearing up the path for the queen. You lose the queen, you lose the game. Boom. Thank you very much. So Magnus very precisely first jumps back with the knight, not only defending that bishop, but also that queen, making sure that the knight can jump out of the way without any tactics. And we see the queen fell back. The knight goes on to A4. The bishops have been traded, and Levon now replaces the bishop with his own queen on this beautiful diagonal. The knight comes back into the game, blocking the check, and a rook to C8 on the board, defending the bishop, lining up the rook against the white queen. Once again, I'm liking how Levon's playing. He's putting on the pressure. He's creating these concrete moves and ideas, starting from the sequence with B4.
I thought we were also going to see a potential intermezzo with B3 first before rook C8, but I guess maybe the reason that might not be the hottest idea is because at some moment later on, the white's knight on f3 only needs one move to go via d2 or d4 to attack that pawn. So maybe it's not quite as secure as I first gave it credit for.
And he also calculating lines of what would happen if there would be a trade, and he decides to keep that pawn on b4. We see this. Now there's a different imbalance in the position, right, John? Because white has got a bishop and a knight versus two knights. Now, conventionally, in an open position, that should favor the side with the bishop. The bishop on f4, which cannot be challenged, can also land on d6. And the more I look at it, you can probably do it immediately as well, because you're just stopping that black king from getting to safety. I like bishop d6 right now.
Bishop d6 looks really, really fun. I mean, at the end of the day, black has delayed castling to get to this position, and there's a lot of piece activity. But at the moment, maybe there's a lot of piece activity for not that much in the way of cost. And bishop d6 is a way of white saying to black, okay, now there is a cost involved. Now I'm going to make you really work hard for the for your right to castle. So suddenly, Magnus putting the pressure back on Levon here, saying, what do you want to do about this?
And I think it's very concrete as well, because the first thing that came to my mind was this knight jumps to e4. You're hitting this bishop. The rook clears the path, hitting the queen. But let's not forget, Magnus has the a4 square. Thank you to that a5 pawn that moved on earlier. Queen a4 comes in with a check and also a double attack on this b4 pawn. So knight c to e4 is actually impossible to play right now.
Can we play knight f to e4, and that means that the knight on c5 covers the a4 square?
That makes a lot of sense, and you really want to get rid of this bishop because it's such a nail in your position right now. And I believe this is on Levon's radar. I really like your suggestion, knight f to e4. I don't really see a way of keeping... You probably just defend the bishop. Ideas like rook f to d1, defending the bishop. Yes, you can take it, but then white's rook will find itself on a nice spot, also eyeing the b6 square. A very complicated position already, and both players under 5 minutes. Now, if Lev was not to go knight f to e4, I'm struggling to find another move, because you can't keep your king in the center of the board forever.
Yeah, exactly. I think... I feel like knight to e4 is the most natural continuation. It has actually been played. The only move I can think that continues this sort of pressure, and I think it might be short-lived, is queen to d1. With the idea being that if you swap off for the bishop, at least you can keep the queen on the diagonal, and you're also getting out of the pin, right? With rook at c1. The problem with that, I think, is that you can just trade off anyway, and then you've got rook d8 at the end of it, and there's just no good square for the queen to go to. You can park yourself on f5 or something, but black just castles and gets on with the show.
Absolutely. And also ideas of pinning this bishop would be very difficult for white to handle. So instead, we've got a move which is rook to d1. And I like this because, yes, you can get rid of the bishop. But as we pointed out, the rook just simply replaces that bishop. It's a beautiful square for the rook. It's also eyeing the b6 square. Thank you so much to that pawn on b4, which has now become a weakness. Magnus Carlsen, the pressure is on Lev. John, how much of a body language expert are you? Because I would love to get a read on Lev right now.
Okay, well, before the start of this broadcast, we took a look at him in his chair, and I'm going to go with the level that his nose and glasses were at, above or below the bottom of the screen. He's getting less. He's getting less and look. He's getting more and more anxious because he's higher up towards the middle of the screen now. We were saying how the more comfortable he gets, the more he's going to slide off the bottom. That's certainly not happening. We've got some deep thought going on right now. 4 minutes 17 plays 3 minutes 5 by the time I say this sentence. So let's get into blitz territory now for our two super GMs.
It is, and Levon is in trouble. His king is still in the center. Magnus putting on the pressure, and I'm sure Lev is feeling it. Let's take this moment to just zoom out of this one.
The board. Here we go. Okay. Rook's chasing queens around the board. The b2 pawn being put under a fair amount of pressure here. We've got, let me see, 4 and 1 versus 4 and 2. So it looks like there's an additional pawn for the side of Magnus Carlsen. Levon Aronian is trying to make something work here in terms of forcing maybe a double pawn if the queen moves. There's a little bit more activity. But Magnus doesn't care. He's happy to play this and squeeze that extra pawn's advantage. I can't think of many things that are more Magnus than that.
But I love the way Levon's handled this. We saw Magnus putting so much pressure out of the opening, and Levon sacrifices a pawn to get some piece activity. Yes, he's got little time. He's under 30 seconds, but the more that it gets simplified, the easier it gets to hold. Look at that. The rook on the open line, attacking that b2 weakness. The queen jumps in, hitting the pawn, hitting the rook. The piece activity more than compensates, I believe, for that extra pawn, and really nicely handled by Levon. This is what I love and learn so much from the top-class world-class players. They are not afraid of sacrificing material to make sure that their pieces remain active in the game. They aren't as attached to pawns as they are to piece activity. And we see the pawn's been recaptured. Black will perhaps lose this a pawn because the rook can jump on to d6. No way to actually defend this pawn. Magnus calculating, does he want to throw in a check before he does that? Yes, you have an extra pawn, but this, at Lev's level, I believe he will hold this position, and he knows how this is done. It's not over yet, but John, I think Lev will hold this one.
It's playing for two results from Magnus's point of view, right? If Levon Aronian is able to make even a single mistake, Magnus takes these wins all day long. Like, it's just what Magnus does, right? But at the same time, Levon Aronian has so much experience that you would expect this under normal circumstances to be a fairly easy to hold draw. And I say normal circumstances, Tanya, because at the end of the day, one of the things Magnus is absolutely amazing at doing is finding every single possible resource at any position. And when you're playing against someone with less than 20 seconds left on his clock, I feel like it really is one of those anything is possible. And if Magnus is playing on the part of anything, you do still have to be sweating a fair bit.
Completely agree, especially when you've got 20 seconds on the clock. And look at that. You were talking about Magnus finding every single resource. He sacrifices a pawn temporarily to make his own king active. And at some point, he is looking at this king getting close to that a pawn to try to assist it to queening. But right now, Levon has managed to equalize the material. Magnus pushes that a pawn, and now the black king is tied down to these two squares. You really cannot advance with the king or move anywhere because the rook will move in with a tempo. Magnus getting his king into the game using those light squares. But how far can this king really get? Because black has got his own counterplay trying to create a passer. I think this is some brilliant defense by Levon. He's saying, sure, come in with your king, but I'm advancing those pawns. Whoa.
This is, H3 Whoa. Played, and the eval bar did not like that one single bit. Magnus sees it as well. He's shaking his head, but rook A3 wasn't the correct response.
John, I'm sorry, you could have just gone king f7, rook f4 is checkmate. You cannot save it. It's a maiden one. You just take away the e6. Oh my goodness, Levon misses it. Unbelievable.
So on the line,
instead. And we will bring
you
up
could
the
see Magnus saw it as
game.
well. He had his hand up in the air. Like, Magnus won't play anything that isn't perfect chess, right? He has such high standards for himself, but Magnus spotted it as soon as it was played, and Levon has less than 10 seconds remaining. That was a big get out of jail free moment for Magnus.
Oh my gosh, I missed the player's reaction. Did Levon react to that moment? Do you think he spotted it after
Levon
playing?
Did not react. Magnus reacted on Levon's move, but Levon did not react.
Unbelievable. I don't know if Levon still knows what he missed, because very often it's better not to know if you missed an opportunity. He could have checkmated Magnus by force. You move the king one step, take away the running square, and that's it. And there's nothing that Magnus could have done to defend that checkmate. What a huge miss.
Still continuing to find resources in this position, and Magnus not wanting to give up the pawn on f2.
But this is just a draw now. This is nothing really to play for. I think this is going to end any moment, and it could have ended in complete disaster for Magnus Carlsen.
That was a heart and throat moment. It'll be interesting afterwards to understand to what extent Levon was also aware of that. But this is going to be a dead draw. The rooks have come off as well. nice and straightforward, but a very
Magnus
fiery
knows.
game number
He
one.
knows. He knows what he survived. He smiled
Oh,
again.
yeah.
He knows that he was so close to disaster in that moment. And Lev, he's going to find out now. He's going to play the moves back. He's going to see what happened. And I think he will know what a golden opportunity he just missed against the world number one.
That was absolutely